Uh, cool. So, Adam, I'm really excited about this. We spoke a lot at Galois when I was interning there, and we worked on some internal R&D together. And I think both of us appreciate like a very practical approach to mathy stuff that other people maybe view more pretentiously. And so we we had similar views on like LLMs and applying LLMs to FM problems and stuff like that. And then we had this hackathon at Galois where you worked on uh, making a chess engine based off ChatGPT. I suspect because you weren't sure that it would work, but then it turned out it worked surprisingly well, and now has turned into this like bizarrely interesting academic project. So I'm very happy to have you here, and I'll just let you take it away.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I mean, uh, for, I guess I wasn't positive how well it would work, but there was an existence proof because shortly before that, people found out that a version of ChatGPT played chess at like 1800 elo, which is like approaching top 1% of players. So it's like clearly LLMs can do it, just a question of how much data, how much compute, basically. And it turned out not that much. Okay, are we good to go? Or can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay. Yeah, so motivation, well, I guess originally I had done, uh, yeah, for this hackathon, I saw there's a version of ChatGPT that can play chess at 1800 elo. So I'm like, well, let's just take a small model, train it for a day or two, and see what happens. And it turns out that in basically a day and a half of training, you can get a model that plays at something like 11 or 1200 elo. And this is a model that's trained from scratch, starting with randomly initialized weights, and it's trained to predict the next character in a PGN string. So, there's other more sophisticated ways you could have done this, but I kind of like the simplicity of just training to predict the next character. And then, in my opinion, it's a like pretty strong analogy to just the setting of training to predict the next token. But anyways, the task was, given some sequence of characters in a PGN string, predict the next character. And it turns out if you just train a small model for a day on like a regular consumer gaming GPU, it can play at around 11 or 1200 elo. So I did that at this hackathon in Galois sometime maybe last fall. And then over Christmas break, I had some free time, and there was a thread that I wanted to poke at, which was there was this project called Othello GPT, where they trained an LLM from scratch to predict the next move in an Othello game. And they found that they could, I'll say what this is, but they found that they could use linear probes to show that, or not linear, they found that they could use probes, non-linear probes in this case, to show that the model actually learns to compute the state of the board in order to predict the next character. And then they validate these by using these probes to erase pieces from the board, and then they find that when you erase these pieces, the model makes legal moves under the new make-believe state of the board. So um, here you can see here's the model's predicted moves in this scenario. They erase a piece, and its moves change to be legal under the new state of the board. The problem with it was they only did this for a large data set of randomly generated Othello games. They tried training on human games, but it didn't work. And I thought this was just like a pretty major problem, actually. But I thought the problem was very straightforward. It's just there's not a lot of Othello games available online. They only had like 100,000. So I was like, well, I'll just try this. I have this chess model. Let's try some of these techniques and see if we get similar results. So here's the training data. Um, so here you can see in this case, here's the input. So it's a chess PGN string. I start with this delimiter to tell the model it's the start of the game. So given this, its task is to predict the next character. So that's how it works during inference time. During training time, it actually has to predict every single character in parallel. So its training task is like given a semicolon, predict a one. Given semicolon one, predict a period, etc. Given this entire string, predict that there's an E3. So that's its training task. I gave it 16 million games, just downloaded them off of Lichess. And here we can see for the best model, its ELO was somewhere in the it's maybe 1500 ELO. It's hard to like exactly quantify the ELO of different stockfish levels. There's a lot of variables. Like one is they do measure the ELO rating of stockfish agents, but they give it 120 seconds per move, which is just like extremely computationally expensive, especially when I'm renting GPUs to benchmark my models against stockfish. So I did 0.1 seconds per move. But anyways, you know, you train a model, 50 million parameter model, and you get somewhere in the order of 1500 ELO. And for context, like a small language model these days is, 7 billion. So that's a few orders of magnitude. And then GPT-4 is like a couple trillion parameters. So, this is many orders of magnitude smaller than current state-of-the-art LLMs. Here you can see I investigated like different model sizes, different data set mixes. This red line that did the best, this was the 50 million parameter model. And I actually had it trained on a data set that I synthetically generated of just stockfish playing itself. So maybe this was higher data set quality than the human games I downloaded. I actually benchmarked the model against stockfish, so maybe it just learned how to play against its opponent a little better. So anyways, now the model learns to play chess. And in my opinion, like if it's learned to play chess well, it has to be learning all the rules of the game and learning to compute the state of the board. Like, there's more possible games of chess than atoms in the universe. So in my opinion, like this is pretty obvious, but a lot of people just say, oh, it's just learning surface statistics. It's just like, learns that these characters are correlated with this character being next, which I think is just not plausible at all. But there's this technique called linear probes where we can actually look inside the model. So what we do is, these models have layers. In this case, there are 8 and 16 layers. And as it's predicting this next character, this n, it basically, you can think of the model as just, it has a vector of 512 numbers that is passed into the first layer, and then that gets passed from layer to layer. So this is like an intermediate hidden state. And we can take this intermediate hidden state as an input to a linear classifier, and then the output is what is the state of this square on the chessboard. So in this case, there's 13 different possible states for any square. It could be, a white king, a white queen, blank, black pawn, black king, black queen, etc. So the model activation, this is a shape. So this just means this is a matrix of 512 numbers, and the linear probe is 512. It's like 13 rows of 512 numbers. So we just do a matrix multiply of the model activations by the linear probe, and we get 13 numbers. These can be large negative or positive values. We do a softmax, so these 13 numbers sum to 1, and we now have a probability distribution for the state of one square on the chessboard. So I trained 64 of these separate linear probes. And here you can see the results of this. So this is, it's kind of, these are, I believe these are the softmax values. So this is the probability distribution for each square of, is this a white pawn or is this not a white pawn? And here you can see, here's the ground truth white pawn positions, and here's the confidence gradient. And then we can also so these are, you can see it ranges from 0 to minus 30. I think it's, let's see. Maybe it's like a negative log. I can't remember exactly what these mean at the moment. But anyways, so here you can see there's like this confidence gradient where it's very confident there's no white pawns on the back rank of either side. Here we can see there's this confidence gradient where it knows where the black king is, and it's very confident the black king is not on the white side of the board. And so another thing is these games aren't randomly generated. They're played by people. So there's these interesting latent variables. such as, how good are the players? So there's this question of, does the model estimate player skill to better estimate the next character? Um, so at first I tried to just have it do a regression task where the input to a linear probe is the model's activations and the output is just the raw ELO value. One problem is most of the players in the data set were in this relatively narrow ELO range of like 1500 to 1900, where it's just like fundamentally difficult to distinguish a 1500 ELO player from a 1700 ELO player. So it did perform better than a random baseline, but like not significantly. This was a confounding factor. So then I changed the task to um, the linear probe is a 2 by 512 matrix, and the output is the probability distribution for, is this player above 2000 ELO or below 1500 ELO. So basically you can think of it as outputting a score for this player is above 2000 ELO and this player is below 1500 ELO. And we can see the results here. So the peak accuracy of correctly classifying what is on a square of the chessboard is 99.6%. And for classifying ELO, it is 90.5%. We can see that the larger model, linear probes trained on the larger model do a little, they're more accurate, indicating that the larger model does a better job of like computing the of computing a world model to predict the next character, which is, we've definitely found with ML that bigger is typically better, so it's not super surprising. One thing we do just as a sanity check is we just take a randomly initialized model. Everything's exactly the same, and we train linear probes on the internal activations of this randomly initialized model. And here we can see that the peak square accuracy is about 75%, and player skill accuracy is about 70%. I was mildly surprised to see this, that it could classify 70% of players correctly, just as a random baseline would be 50%, but I'd be curious to dig into this more to understand why this is. 75% square accuracy makes sense because I think in the average board state of a randomly selected chess game, 75% of squares will be blank, or somewhere in that ballpark. And then here we can just see this is the probe accuracy per layer. So at the first layer, when it's just at the very first layer, it's hardly doing better than the random baseline. And through the layers, the model calculates a more and more accurate state of the board until the middle layers, and then after that, this classification accuracy drops off. So like, the story I can tell myself about what's going on here that seems plausible is it computes the state of the board. In the middle layers, it has the board state computed, and then it's using that board state to predict probability distribution over next moves. And in these last couple layers, it's not as important to maintain a good board state accuracy. So one thing that's interesting is these models have, everything's identical in the 8-layer and the 16-layer model, except for the number of layers. And it's definitely possible to calculate a very accurate board state by layer 5, because the 8-layer model does it. But the 16-layer model waits until layer 12 to calculate this accurate of a board state.
Adam,
So it's like,
if
yep.
if we take at face value this assumption that there's like an internal world model, which I think you have a reasonable argument for, do you think it's possible that the later layers are doing some more abstract level of reasoning, and that's why they don't have that very precise board state,
Um,
like some high level strategy or something? Or am I anthropomorphizing too much?
like if I had to guess, and this is something I'm actually going to be digging into. I guess I'm digging into it right now. Hopefully, I'll have results in the future. But I think so. Like at the very beginning of this model, the input is just a bunch of characters, and the model basically has to find relationships between these characters. Maybe it's like layer one, all it knows is here's this list of characters, and then maybe this is just purely a story I'm telling right now. But by layer two, it connects E with 5 to say, oh, there's a pawn that was moved to E5, and then as it goes on, it takes this concrete list of characters and it makes it into this. It transforms them into this like abstract world model in the middle layers. And I think like if I had to guess what's going on, I think it's once it has the world model. It also this isn't discussed in the blog post, but one thing I just checked recently is by this at the same layer, it has its peak accuracy for classifying which squares threatened by the opponent. So I think it takes these first 5 layers to do a bunch of calculation to determine like which pieces are pinned, which pieces or which squares are threatened, where are all the different pieces. Probably stuff like, do I have a castle available? And then once it has this, then it starts to just compute a probability distribution over all the possible next moves and what's most likely to be played. So um, I'm guessing once it starts to compute possible next moves, it's just not that useful to maintain the board state, and it's better to discard the board state and just focus on taking this representation and converting it into a probability distribution over next moves.
Hey Adam, uh, quick question.
Yep.
Quick question. Do you think if you had trained on something like Chess 960, where you had like greater diversity in the earlier game, that you would need like a larger model, or like you'd see like this this board representation get propagated further into the model?
Let's see. So chess. I'm presuming there must be some notation in chess. Is chess 960? Is that the version of chess where basically the pieces on the back rank are scrambled?
Yeah, yeah. There's some like set of like valid permutations for the
Okay.
back rank.
Yeah. Um, it seems like if you held model size constant, I would guess that basically playing ability, legal move rate, etc., would go down. So to like achieve an equivalent uh, chess playing ability, you'd probably need a bigger model for the one training on chess 960. And then I don't really have any like speculation on what would happen to the board state in the internal layers of the model.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So the one thing we can see here is board state accuracy peaks and drops off towards the. In contrast, uh, the classification accuracy of player skill peaks at the very last layer of the model. So, the story I'm telling myself, or like what I'm guessing is happening, is it computes the board state, and it uses that to compute a range of possible next moves. And then one of the things that influences at the final layer the probability distribution is the level of player skill. So for the model, um, it's useful to have the most accurate estimate of player skill at the very last layer. One thing I also found is I trained linear probes on the model to see if it could predict what the next move was. Um, so as in, like at the very beginning of the game, can it predict that the next move is, pawn to e4 or something? And I also found that in this case, accuracy peaked at the very final layer. So it's like if we just train linear probes across all layers of the model for different features, you can see for some it's useful, or for some the model peak achieves peak accuracy in layers, and for others it achieves peak accuracy at later layers. And this is presumably useful for how it whatever it's doing to predict the next character. And then one thing I'll highlight that I also found to be pretty odd was when training on board state classification accuracy on a randomly initialized model, accuracy per layer is basically flat. And for randomly initialized models on ELO classification, it starts at 55 or so percent, which seems pretty reasonable because random baseline is 50%. But then through the randomly initialized model, accuracy climbs until roughly layer 8, and I really have no idea what's going on there. I'd be curious to dig into that at some point.
It seems like
Yep.
that would that seem to support kind of Max's idea that these later layers are like more involved in strategy and or tactics, that like the later layers are more involved in like next move prediction.
No, so this is a randomly initialized model, so just random weights, and every one of these layers of random numbers, they perform some they transform the hidden state vector in some way before passing it to the next layer. And for whatever reason, these random transformations are transforming this hidden state where linear probe does a better job of classifying player skill. So I think this would like indicate something about the architecture of transformers, some like inductive bias or something that, for whatever reason, even purely randomly initialized weights help with the task. But I don't, I don't actually know what's going on. That's just some speculation.
Oh, sorry. I thought I think I may have misheard you. I thought you had said something about the later layers being more involved in like next move accuracy classification.
Yeah. Okay. Could you restate the question then?
So I thought I had written down in my notes or something that you had said that when trying to gauge like which parts of the model were more involved in like next move accuracy, that it was like the later layers in the model, like the ones that have gone through like these latent space transformations. So if that's the case, would that kind of like support Max's hypothesis that these like later parts of the model are more involved in like these higher order abstractions within chess? Like, okay, like I'm going to control this part of the board. I want to exploit this weakness or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think that would. Then
Adam, I think you cut out for
mid to late layers would be the most important for, because at the final layer, ultimately it has to also do the job of predicting the next character. So, okay. Let's see. Am I coming through clear now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Yeah. So I was just saying that, at the very final layer, not only does it have to do these abstract manipulations of whatever's going on inside, but it also has to take this hidden state and actually concretely predict the next token. So it seems like the very final layers would be doing somewhat less abstract manipulations because they actually have to predict the next token. But that's just a thought.
It would also be interesting to see if, as the number of pieces on the board reduces, does the model kind of zoom in? Like, does it only sort of care about the region of the board where gameplay is currently happening and stop having accurate predictions about stuff outside, right? Or for instance, when it initially predicts the placement of a piece, does it do so in a way that doesn't impact the gameplay, where like the alternative board would be, equivalent in terms of what the next move is, right? I think there's some interesting semantical questions about gameplay that could be asked with this linear probes approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big one in particular would be, just if they do studies of human chess players, and they give, if they give a human chess player, here's a chessboard state from a real game, at a glance they can memorize the board state and like reproduce it pretty easily. But if they give them, here's a bunch of pieces randomly placed on a chessboard, they don't perform any better than the baseline of, just average humans. So chess players aren't actually memorizing the position of every piece on the board. They're actually just like, this is some common board configuration that you'd expect to see during gameplay. So it would be, I think, pretty interesting to try to understand if the model is actually doing something similar.
And I think another interesting question would be not just like move classification accuracy, but what is the sent upon error of the suggested move? Because it may be suggesting a move that wasn't played, but would still be a high quality move.
Yeah.
I don't know. One
Yeah.
one thought that I was having is it's interesting that the that like it's able to win against Stockfish, right? Because the train it's just trying to predict the next move, but the training data supposedly like half of all the games in the training data, the players lost. The training
Yeah.
data is like blunders, and it's just trying to predict the next move, not the best move. So it's weird that that like it performs as if it's predicting the best move, anyways.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like if this truly was like the perfect next character predictor and you had it play against a range of people, I would expect that its like overall win rate would come to 50%. Uh, I don't know. It's hard to really like reason about this, but that seems plausible. I think one other thing is for these uh, the levels of stockfish that it has a win rate of greater than 50% against. Like the elo of these stockfish levels is on the order of like 1300, 1500. This is below the average playing ability of the average player on Lichess. So that's another factor, is just that the average player in its training data set is better than stockfish level 0.
Adam, what happens if you train it to win? Like if you make it predict the winning player's moves the whole time, do you get something that outperforms high grade stockfish bots?
I haven't done that. Let's see. So here's one. Like one thing I thought there is, um, I think just a good diverse mix of data is good because, like, then the model still learns how to play well even in, like losing positions. But one thing I did experiment with, it's not on this chart, but I tried prepending the PGN string with the result of the game. So like 1-0 or 0-1 or 1/2-1/2, just to tell the model like, are you supposed to win or lose? And it didn't make a very big difference, but I think it should make a difference. It's probably just maybe the model wasn't quite big enough or smart enough to actually take the information there and say like, oh, I'm supposed to be playing like a winning player. Uh, like one thing we can see here is that, so for these different data set mixes, this red line is just, it's all stockfish playing stockfish. This brown line and this green line are just all human games. But then I also experimented with a 50-50 mix of Lichess and stockfish and filtering for games from players that are greater than 1800 elo. We can see that both of these strategies improved over the baseline of only human games. Let's see. So anyways, at this point, we've trained linear probes, and it's like, this seems like a reasonable signal that the model's learned something. But one strategy to really get some confidence in the representations you found is to perform interventions. So initially, I started with. So another experiment I did was, if you start the game with 20 random moves against this particular configuration of stockfish, the original win rate is 70%. And you initialize the game with 20 random moves, and the win rate drops to 17%. So you could say like, oh, this proves that the model just learns how to, pattern match, and it doesn't actually learn how to play chess. But the story that I thought was more likely was for a large language model like GPT-3. If you ask it some nonsense question, like, when was Egypt transported for the second time across the Golden Gate Bridge? It'll give you some nonsense answer. But I think that it's just like in its training data set, some BS answer to this question is more likely than some, than the model saying like, I'm sorry, I'm a language model, I can't do that, or that's a nonsense question. It's just, this is probably from some comedy or some Redditors making up some random stories or something. So it's just like a truly good next token predictor would just try to continue with the context that it has. And I thought that, this model, it looks like it learns to represent player skill. So if the board starts with 20 random moves, it's probably just trying to predict the next character as if it's a very low skill player. So it'll make legal but low skill moves. So to perform these interventions, so here we can see, so basically what's going on is this is called the residual stream. It's like an anthropic term. It's becoming more popular, but basically this is the hidden state. It starts as just 512 numbers that are determined by the embedding of the token. And then this layer, it reads from that hidden state, and then it adds an update to it. The next layer reads from the hidden state, it adds an update to it. It's not, the important thing here is it's adding an update. It's not like outputting the complete hidden state for the next layer. And so what we can do to perform interventions is this hidden state, this residual stream, it's just a vector of 512 numbers. So we can just add another vector of 512 numbers. Any point in the residual stream, and this will be an intervention on the model. Like you can get an equivalent result by just adding a bias term right here. And this will give you an equivalent intervention that's like completely free for inference. See, do I have, okay. So that's the intervention we're doing. Here's one of the questions we have. So I also experimented with interventions on board state. So in this case, you can delete random pieces off the chessboard, but like often it won't be relevant to the state of the game. So it's like maybe the model shouldn't change its behavior if I delete, this black pawn off of the board. So what I did to make sure that my interventions were strategically relevant was I sampled the deterministic next move prediction from the model. So here it's pawn from C2 to C3. And then I delete this pawn from both the model's internal representation and from the chessboard. And then I basically I resample a new move from the model, and I confirm that this new move is illegal under the modified state of the board. So in this case, this pawn isn't here. Basically, in this case, a failure would be my intervention is not successful, and it still tries to move this pawn. If you apply like a very strong intervention, then a lot of times the model just start outputting random characters. So that's another failure mode. So we can make a heat map of the model's internal representation. Here is pre-intervention, here's post-intervention. So we can see we successfully deleted this pawn, but this intervention does have side effects. It's not very sophisticated. You can see that these other pawns are a little more blurry. Let's see. So one question is, what is this intervention actually? It's actually very simple. So we have 64 separate linear probes, one for each square, and we move this pawn. So we want to delete the pawn off C2. So we take the C2 linear probe. The C2 linear probe is a 512 by 13 matrix. So it's 13 rows of 512 numbers. And the output is 13 numbers. So the goal of the linear probe is we'll multiply the model's activations with every row of this matrix, and this will output 13 numbers. And the linear probe's goal is to output a very high number, a very large positive number for white pawn, and much lower numbers for the other 12 possibilities. So all we do is we take the row that corresponds to the white pawn from the linear probe, and we subtract it right here. So we have 512 numbers. That's the white pawn row for square C2. And we just do a subtraction from the hidden state. And if we do that, the model makes legal moves under the new modified state of the board. And it's similar for skill interventions. For skill interventions, we have a 512 by 2 matrix. So one row corresponds to, this is probably a high skill player. The other is, this is probably a low skill player. What I found was that you can do either or. Like you can just only subtract low skill or only add high skill. But in this case, I found that the best results were from both adding high skill and subtracting low skill. One other thing I'll note is that I also experimented with not only subtracting the white pawn from c2, but also adding blank square to c2. And I found that it was actually better to only subtract without any addition of the blank square vector. So in terms of board state, so the original model makes legal moves around 99.9% of the time. And if we sample from the unmodified model and see if its moves are legal under the modified state of the board, it's only legal 40% of the time. So this is like basically a baseline. And I sample 5 moves from both the modified and unmodified models. So 40% of the time, the original model makes a legal move, and we apply our intervention, and this increases to 92%. Here we can see that like 80% of the time, the move from the modified model is legal under the original board state, but this is expected from chess. Like if I delete this pawn, most of these other moves should still be legal. So anyways, this is good, but not great. Like it'd be nice to figure out more sophisticated intervention techniques, because it's possible to make 99.9% legal moves. So if we had a really sophisticated understanding of the model's internals and what to do with them, we should be able to obtain a similar accuracy. But this is a pretty new science, so I thought it's still a good result. And then for our original question, so we start with this so our original win rate is 70%, and we randomly initialize the board, and it drops to 17%. And we just apply our positive skill intervention, and the win rate goes to 43%. So this is this really adds some evidence to our theory that the model is trying to predict the next character as if it's a low skill player. In the case of the standard boards, I found that a positive intervention doesn't really make much of a difference. I think it's because the model is already like playing the best that it can, because the average player in its training data set is actually higher skilled than the model is. So it's always trying to play the best that it can. But if we apply our negative intervention, we can drop its win rate by quite a bit while still having it make legal moves. Yeah, so that is that. Yeah, any questions? And I can also talk about some future work that I've got going on.
With the intervention, does it make more sense to add a piece or move a piece rather than subtracting a piece? I would think that like the easiest way to force a change would be to just put a piece where it was going to put something, and then
yeah, that'd be another thing to do. I just wanted something simple that seemed plausible, and then I was doing I did a ton of hyperparameter sweeps over like various different ways I tried a bunch of different, I came up with some clever ideas on better intervention techniques. None of them worked better than like the really simple baseline, but yeah, anyways, this seems like reasonable. There wasn't like any existing work that I could really point to, so I'm just like, I'll just make up something that seems like that's the thing that I care about.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, along those lines, another like relatively easy way that you could check would just be to drop a piece that would put the king in check, and like there's only like a relatively small number of moves that would like put that king out of check.
Yeah. There's definitely that'd be a pretty good one. There's definitely a lot of ways you can get a more nuanced understanding, but for me, it's just right now, with that intervention being 92% accurate, I just think, I think the thing I'm more interested in right now is just better understanding of model internals and interventions. So
yeah,
it's like this evaluation that I came up with is good enough for the task at hand.
I was gonna say, back to your interventions with random board states.
Yep.
So like chess is like a stateless game, right? So we don't we don't need the prior history of the board to know like what the optimal move should be. So
Correct.
instead of just initializing the board with random moves because you're like encoding like states of the game and which would like carry along information about player skill, like could you just start with a fen, like just like the was it Forsyth Edwards notation of what the current
Yeah.
board state is, and then have the model generate like the next move?
Yep. You could do that. I mean, I think. I mean, the first thing is, I think there's probably still probably a pretty strong correlation with like general flavors of board state and player skill. I actually think I read something about that. Like, um, if we look statistically at, here's a bunch of high skill player games, here's a bunch of low skill player games. There's pretty strong patterns of like low skill players tend to end up in positions like this that high skill players
Mhm.
don't. But I did actually train one to go from fen to next move.
Mhm.
But I mean, I think first the PGN string is just way more interesting because then it's explicitly calculating board state.
Mhm.
In terms of like even if you're trying to create a really good chess bot, I'm not actually like performance was very comparable. Uh, it might have even been slightly better for PGN, and I think the reason for that is during training, uh, basically every state of predicting the next character in the PGN string, the model's doing some like useful, challenging task. But if you're training on fen notation, it's like you're training on 70 characters telling you the board state, and you're training on 4 characters telling you the next move. So
Mm.
the vast majority of your computation during training is like not useful.
So I guess the way that I was thinking of doing it would rather be subsample some games at some random ply depth, and then like initialize it, like say it like move 7. Here's the fen,
Yeah,
and then play out the rest of the game from move 7, and then
yeah,
you can just do that at arbitrary depths throughout the game.
yeah, yep. Yeah, I think that would work. I'm guessing. Like, yeah, I think one confounder would just be. I'm guessing the model would learn to estimate player skill from the initial starting position. Um,
So
but
you could also ablate that by using like an opening move book of like
yeah,
theoretically
yeah,
sound moves, or generate a synthetic training set from just stockfish with various like restrictions on resources, like okay, you only get to search so many nodes, or you only have so much time to search.
yeah. Yeah, I think another thing you can do is just prepend the PGN string or whatever you're working with the elo of the players involved, and then if you want high skill play, you could just prepend the PGN string with 2300 elo or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think especially if you're going with synthetic data sets, then it'd be like pretty easy to get around this problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if there are any applications of transfer learning to explainability. Like, does it give you any information about what sort of reasoning the model might be doing if you see how well the model does when you apply it to other types of games, like checkers or something like that?
Yeah, huh? I mean, the challenge here is this is just like an extremely narrow model.
Right.
So yeah, I'm not really sure what the transfer story there would be. Like, I think the transfer story is very clear when like you train the model to classify 10,000, on a million images of these 10,000 different classes, and then like you want to specialize on one class. Like it already has this very general knowledge. Versus with chess, it's literally all the model has ever seen in the world, PGN string. So it has zero real general knowledge. Maybe there's some clever thing you could do that would show that it learns checkers faster.
So there's a variant of stockfish called fairy stockfish, and it's got, I don't know, maybe 2 dozen different games encoded in it, and it's using stockfish's same like search algorithm with some kind of tuned evaluation functions for each game. So you could do kind of like a hold one out kind of experiment on that, where it trains on like n-1 game, and then you can
Yeah.
see how it performs on the held out game.
Yeah, well, actually, then there's this recent paper called Grandmaster Level Chess Without Search from Google DeepMind. And basically what they found to make, because, normal, like Stockfish, the reason it's so good, or a critical reason it's so good is that it just performs a lot of search. Um, like playing out the game tree and like, oh, this is the best move. And they've made a model that played pretty well, like roughly Grandmaster level without search. For that, what they did is they just created this giant data set of here is a fen, here is a next move, and then they had Stockfish grade the next move with like centipon rating or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then so they just trained basically a pretty similar thing actually, just a transformer that goes from fen to next move, or the input is fen and the next move, and then it grades the move. So they just have it grade all possible moves and select the one that was the best. And they found that that worked pretty well for creating a model that plays well without search.
It's kind of like it's kind of like what Leela, or sorry, what Alpha's Go or Alpha Zero was doing, where it has to output like some sort of move probability distribution, and like it gives an evaluation for each board state. So it's just that what you just described, but iterated with like Monte Carlo tree search or alpha beta or whatever flavor of search you want to use.
So I have a question about this. So how does this model work as you look towards very high levels of play, right? I know this is sort of a proof of concept, you have limited compute, but for example, I think AlphaZero has a very reinforcement learning based approach. It seems like Stockfish has its own search trees, it has its endgame engine, all sorts of different things. Is this something that you see scaling favorably in competing with these if you were to throw more compute at it? Does it run into some limitations? Does it train at a different rate? I know those are tough to answer, but I'm curious about that.
Yeah. I mean, like for this thing to really scale, like it just needs search, period. So I think this might actually be a reasonable one to scale. Or I think like if you just took one of these models, roughly this ballpark of size, and just bolted on some Monte Carlo tree search, it'd probably actually work pretty well. So there's this GPT 3.5 variant that plays at 1800 elo, but rough estimates that it's somewhere around like 40 to 80 billion, or it's somewhere in the order of magnitude of like 40 billion parameters. OpenAI hasn't released it, but there's been some estimates done. So anyways, that's like 4 orders of magnitude, and it gets you an extra 300 elo. So in this case, it would work much better to take a way smaller model and just use Monte Carlo tree search because it's way more compute efficient. So anyways, I think it could scale. As to how it compares with other, I'm guessing it'd be not as favorable just because it's having to spend a bunch of computing a board state versus other models are just given it.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you.
Have you played against it at all, Adam?
Yeah, we did for this hackathon at Galois. We actually, well, I guess the team I was working with, we hooked it up to like a web browser, and we posted it on the internal Galois website where people could play it. At the time, that was just the one that trained for like a day and a half, so it was just like 11 or 1200 elo. That one was interesting to play against. Like if you just played completely normally, like you're playing against a competent, chess player, it's pretty challenging, and it beat a lot of us. Like it beat me the first couple times I played it. But basically, if you just kind of played random moves and then like just really bided your time, like if you saw like, oh, it has its king is on the back rank with 3 pawns in front of it, so I just need to get a rook back there and I'll have a checkmate. Like it wouldn't notice that at all. So like once you kind of adapted your playing strategy to take advantage of its weaknesses, then it wasn't nearly as good. But I did train a different model. This one was trained for, I guess, a day and a half on 4 GPUs on a little better data set. And in this case, it that was like 1500 to 1600 elo. So I'm guessing that would beat me a lot more often.
Oh, interesting. I was just curious about like if it had like a personality, so to speak, like some of the I guess kind of like qualitative descriptors that was given towards like Leela Zero and Alpha Zero. was that its play was more, I guess, human, or at least more human interpretable than
Yeah.
some of the classical chess engines at the time, which make like solid moves, but they're described as computery.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I thought the biggest like personality thing I really noticed was just that it'd be totally blind to weaknesses. Like, you know, for most of us, it's like if you play chess a little bit, it's really obvious when you have 3 pawns in front of your king on the back rank, because then it's like as soon as there's a rook or a queen back there, it's game over. But it would just not notice. It would, you know, it'd play 20 moves like that and not advance a pawn. So you just have to learn to like, yeah, and making random moves help as well. See, one thing I saw in the chat is en passant. The other thing that's history dependent is castling rights. I actually had to write some code for this because for one part of the project I needed to generate. See, so I converted the PGN string to tensors, like matrices basically, and I wanted to convert it back to a Python chessboard object, and I realized that basically you lose information if you just go straight from chessboard to chessboard. Like you really need that game history to maintain castling rights and en passant, and there might have been one other thing I can't remember.
So I think FEN should contain castling rights information.
Yeah.
So I think it's just the en passant that you may lose out with just the fan.
Yeah. See, so I'll just quickly go into future work here. So I actually got accepted to this program called MATS. Basically, it's kind of put on by like the AI alignment or safety community. You know, the concern they have is, you know, AI alignment interpretability work just is not commercially viable right now. So you know, there's not a lot of it going on. So this is people at DeepMind, Anthropic, OpenAI trying to mentor people to get more AI alignment, interpretability type work going on. So I got accepted to that. As far as the angle I think is most promising, there's this new technique called sparse autoencoders that has been good for like some interpretability of large language models. So you can like throw a sparse autoencoder at a language model, and you can say like, oh, here's a feature that fires on, you know, stuff related to Canada or something. And then you can take this feature and you can make it the model output Canada like things. But it's, you know, it's pretty surface level. Another thing you can do is you can use it to do stuff like, you know, here we've determined a circuit and the model's internals for how it, you know, computes how like the subject of a sentence is related to a verb in the sentence or something, but it's still really surface level. And like a huge problem with sparse autoencoders is that you know, like a lot of times in machine learning you just have a loss, so you just fiddle with the dials, and if the loss goes down, you're good. But with sparse autoencoders, there's not really any number that corresponds to how interpretable the features are. So, you know, there's these very crude proxies, and you fiddle with all the various dials and hyperparameters and data mixes. And then, you know, these crude proxies go down, but it still takes a ton of work to, you know, scroll through tons of features and try to evaluate, like, is this actually more interpretable or not? So basically, the work that I'm starting on now, I got some collaborators, is basically just take this sparse autoencoder technique that seems to be pretty promising and try to apply it to chess, where every token in an input, we have this ground truth world model. Like, we know what the state of the chessboard is. So hopefully we can do this and quantify, like, here's a sparse autoencoder we trained, and we can say that, you know, this one has a, you know, 75% interpretability score because it found all of these board square states or something. So this is just speculative, but it seems promising. Yeah, in my opinion, like, interpretability just really needs something like this to really ground the work it's doing, because it doesn't feel very grounded. Just like fiddle with some fiddle with some hyperparameters. This number goes, you know, these crude proxies change, and like you stare at these features, and it's like, I don't know, maybe it's more interpretable, maybe it's not. So obviously, chess is a toy problem. Who knows how transferable like the lessons learned will be, but that's what I'm trying to do next. I think it'd be cool. Like, I think it's pretty plausible that we could eventually come up with like a full circuit saying like, here is how the model actually transforms a set of input characters into an internal world model, into an output character. And I think that would be, you know, that'd be pretty cool. I guess one other thing I'll say is just so I'll be done with maths in August, but then I'll be on the job market. So just if you know of anything that seems like it could be a fit, yeah, I'd love to make a connection or get referred to someone. So yeah, any questions on that?
It all sounds really cool. I guess one last thought from me is that, to Casey's question, I wonder if you, I mean, this is not academic, but I wonder if you can train a bot to have the personality of a particular chess player by fine-tuning it on their games, right?
Yeah,
It'd be sort of interesting. Although again, I don't think there's much academic value to the question. It's mostly just a socially interesting one.
yeah. I actually talked to some machine learning engineers where they're working on. They might release this as an app or something, but basically they have like a version of Maya where it can predict the average next move of a 1200 elo player versus a 2000 elo player, and they can use this to like basically really exploit the 1200 elo player and teach them like, hey, here's all the mistakes you're making, because they can have the bot play less optimal moves that exploit the 1200 elo player. One of the things they mentioned is that if they have a decent data set of one player's game history, then you could just fine tune the model on that and really like exploit that player and make them play better.
And say that was a side project I was actually working on, Max. I was trying to make a chess network clone because he's got a really big play history.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting.
I was going to
Yeah,
say
there's a lot of or like if you think of in the limit a model learning to predict the next character of a chess game, like it really has to do a lot of like theory of mind modeling. Um, so like if it was just an extremely good next character predictor, so it definitely seems like something like that's possible. It's just the biggest constraint is how much data does it require.
Mhm. I was gonna say, so I think it was something that Alpha Star did was that they included the elo as one of the input parameters to like the game state, and they found by tweaking that elo input, they could affect the types of mistakes that the model would make, and like when it would perform approximately well to the input elo.
Yeah, yeah. I actually had one of the authors of the AlphaStar paper reply to me and just say that they also found that basically is really important for the model, or is very beneficial for the model to condition on player elo, because otherwise it just like learn to play like an average player. But if you just include the elo of the player in its training data set, then it'd learn how to play like a desired skill rating.
Mhm.
Cool. Well, Adam, this was super interesting. Thanks for joining us. I'd love to see, what comes out of your maths work. And I think I'm also very curious to see if LLMs can do other kind of semantical looking things. Like, can we train an LLM to do SMT solving and have the outputs be mostly right? Right. That would be kind of interesting. And so hopefully more work like this happens in the future. So keep us updated on what you're doing, and thanks for joining us today.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Bye.